Welcome to Horror Makes Us Happy, the podcast where we ask the question, what is it about horror that makes us happy? Your hosts are Steve Becker and myself, Chris Whitman, and you can find out more about us at our website, horrormakesushappy.com. Before we get started, this is the trigger warning. This is a horror podcast, so we will be talking about horror stuff and things of the dark nature, which will include, which could potentially potentially include, not will, definitely not going to be talking about, baby killing and rape. But those things could be included. We talk about some dark stuff on this show, so this is the warning for that. If that's not your cup of tea, maybe take a second and think about it and come back. Or if that is your cup of tea, enjoy the show. We talk about dark stuff here.
Welcome.
There are 3 H's in that. Welcome. In the near future, we will be interviewing director Eduardo Sanchez, also president of Rue Morgue website, Rodrigo Godinho, staff writer for Dread Central, Tyler Dupay, as well as a Twitch streamer by the name of Harry Horror. But today we have the pleasure of the company of Mr. Ash Hamilton, creator of horror website The Horror Fix. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
Thank you.
Before we get into the meat of the interview, do you want to tell us what you're currently working on?
Yeah, and depending on when this drops, November 1st, our film Holes in the Sky, the Sean Miller story, will hit Amazon and Vudu exclusively, with more TV VOD releases and DVD and Blu-ray on December 6th.
Nice. This might drop sometime in December, so whoever does end up listening to this could definitely check all of those things out. That's cool.
Perfect.
Actually, you know what? We did forget part of the announcements. We are, somewhat recently joining Twitch and Discord. We do listen parties of the podcast on Discord every Sunday. So come check that out if you'd like. There are links to that on our website. Some of the other stats that we've gotten from Spotify show that there are some drop-offs in listeners around the 40-minute mark, which is understandable because, if you're commuting, most commutes aren't, more than an hour. But often the end of the episodes are the best part. So if you do need to drop off, we strongly recommend that you come back and check out the ending. All right, so I don't know how much we talked about this, Ash, but basically the general concept for what we do is we talk about your experiences with horror from childhood through teenage years and adulthood and try to piece together what it is that you love about horror. So starting with childhood, what are some of your earliest memories of scary things?
Well, I'm a bit of an older guy, not like older in the sense of 60s or 70s, but I'm in my 40s. So I'm one of these guys that's seen the generational push from 3 and 4 channels on TV to cable to then internet. So a lot of my earliest memories were very event centric. We would try to stay up till midnight for midnight movies on like the local big networks and CBS and NBC and even stuff that would come like on PBS. So my mother was a big fan of horror films. She still is, actually. And she would just, be like, oh, hey, there's, Dracula, Prince of Darkness is on at midnight. So I know you're only 8. However, since your father works third shift, you're like my only friend. And we are going to watch Dracula, Prince of Darkness together.
That is awesome and slightly wholesome in a way. I know you're only 8, but I want to watch this show and you're cool enough, right? Let's watch this show.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We'll get into the night terrors and all the later.
These things happen.
Well, she did it to herself.
Right. It's like,
and you,
3:00 where she's like, why are you still in here? And I'm like, well, I just keep peeing. So she was, but very liberal in the sense of I guess probably, at least I hope so anyways, sort of watched me during the film and realized it is something that I could handle and that I was enjoying it. And I think that as a kid, I enjoyed this ritual that seemed to be sort of, reserved for adults. And yet I was being made part of it. So the idea of staying up and popcorn and sort of the ritual of the midnight movie became something that I was just sort of, it just intrinsically part of who I was. And as I got older, I think I was always trying to sort of recapture that feeling of, wow, this is great. It's communal. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. So you kind of got an early automatic introduction into horror and had, I don't know if this is a bad analogy or metaphor for it, but like a chase the dragon effect ever after, because like you had that first initial excitement of it, and then after that it's just like I always want more.
Yeah, I think a lot of horror fans do that, or just genre fans in general. I think this also applies to probably sci-fi and some other, like big, again, like event-centric sort of movies where you realize, that The Exorcist had a huge impact on you. Remember the way you felt when you watched it. And then you've got that baseline comparison to everything that comes afterwards, where this made me feel this way. And therefore, this is where I categorize this movie and that movie. And you're always sort of looking for that other movie that sort of revitalizes, and renews your interest in horror. And luckily, horror is sort of that redheaded stepchild still of cinema, where people are doing new things constantly. So it's sort of easy to have that interest renewed because we see so many films come out that are sort of experimental in that nature, I think.
Also the emotional attachment of being able to experience this as a kid, like you say, hanging out with your mom and doing not necessarily something that you shouldn't be doing, but like you said, being involved in something that is, in a way sort of special. And that, being able to stay up till midnight to watch a movie is not something that most 8-year-olds get to do.
No, and it was a huge bonding experience that lasted even into adulthood. I moved away and I was on the East Coast for a number of years, about 12 years, and then eventually moved back to the Midwest. And when I did, my mother and I started sort of that ritual again where I would come over and I don't know if this is the best example, but we would watch like Human Centipede and order like lava cakes from Papa John's.
that is a good combination. There is nothing wrong with that combination at all. Nope.
So good, and the result of so much PTSD. Yeah.
I can see no way in which this carefully laid plan can ever go wrong.
Chocolate has a new connotation.
So rich.
So, all right, what else? Dracula, Prince of Darkness. Any other big standouts in terms of media?
A lot of the Hammer stuff. I mean, I think that this was stuff that a lot of these networks had access to.
Right.
They hadn't experienced any real renewal and enthusiasm for those movies because there wasn't a home video market yet. So I think back then these were movies that sort of just sat there. There wasn't any real way to, review them. So they didn't have an idea of probably just how much these movies meant to people.
It's stuff they could get cheap.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we watched, the Consonant movie.
The Consonant movie?
It's just all S's.
It's just the Consonant movie. It should be subtitled that, I think. And some made-for-TV movies that they would replay. I remember Trilogy of Terror with Karen Black having a profound effect on me as a kid. It terrified me, absolutely, terrified me to the core. And I had an older sister who did horrible, horrible things after I watched that movie to ensure that terror was instilled in there and was never leaving.
As older sisters do, it's kind of their job.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. She was very good. And we're talking about bad things that happen when you're a kid, but the amount of Vesuvius urinating at the stuff that she would do to me while I was trying not to think of the little Hatchet Man, the little Zuni fetish doll from Trilogy. It's pretty bad.
Did she make a doll and stick it in your bed or something?
My mother had all of these crazy wigs. She was a beautician at one point in time.
Okay.
And she had one that was just, this ratty sort of huge black wig. So I'm trying to sleep in my sister's in my room and she's got a butter knife and she's tapping on the floor with the butter knife. She's got this huge wig on and she's making that Zuni fetish, Zuni fetish sound. Yeah, this started a lot of estrangement later on with my sister and I, but
okay. Yeah, so far it sounds like you got a 50-50 mix of positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement at a young age. So this is going to be good.
A nice roller coaster ride. Just ensure some heavy emotional trauma growing up. But
again, as sisters are wont to do, this is the way.
Yes.
Not to say that I didn't get her back, but that was also a constant too, was this volley of horrible things that we sort of did to each other growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Again, siblings.
Yep. Yes. Yes. But that was one of the worst, was because she had seen, the look on my face as that little, doll was trying to kill Karen Black. And I think, she had to have just been smiling this enormous, like, shit-eating grin. Like, there it is.
Right. The wheels are turning like, yes.
Oh, I know what I'm going to do to him.
After I'm gaining my foothold. Yeah. Yeah. Across the room. Good stuff. But yeah, those two movies were great. I mean, like, Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, Gargoyles. I mean, it's strange to think of two movies back then as sort of being impactful because, there was a lot of limitations on what they could do. But man, we got really good TV movies back in the day. I grew up in a town of about 400 people. The nearest town was about 9 miles away. So we were surrounded by nothing but woods and cornfield. So I didn't have the kind of exposure that I really wanted to movies and film and sort of the behind the scenes stuff. They would once a week drive me into the nearest metropolitan area. When I say metropolitan area, I'm being very loose with that term because it was probably 38,000 people, but it was a place that had a couple bookstores, a few places where we could get magazines. So I would always go and try to pick up like old copies of Famous Monsters of Filmland, try to get like the newest issue of Fangoria, anything that was available to me. So I think when I got really into this idea of I want to continually watch this stuff and I'm interested in this stuff, then it was sort of promoted that I learn about it, like learn how it's done. And I just consumed anything I could get my hands on. We would go to used bookstores and I would just go through stacks of magazines.
So even at that age, you were already starting to look sort of, pull the curtain back and look behind the scenes.
Yeah. There was a magic store that was, again, everything was at least like 40 minutes away. Like no matter what you wanted to do, there was a drive associated with it,
Mm-hmm.
So there was a magic store that was about 40 to maybe 50 minutes away from me. And I got to know even as a kid, I got to know the owner fairly well. And they also had a lot of like Ben Nye sort of makeup, like derma wax. They had like collodion and stuff to make scars. They had liquid latex. So he was sort of showing me some of these like tricks. And even like first and second grade, I'm walking around going, look, I slipped my wrist. My teachers were like, here we go.
Perfectly normal behavior for a child of that age.
I'm sure if there was like school shootings back then and the amount that there is now, there would have been a huge red flag on my file.
Pretending you had gunshot wounds instead of slitting your wrists.
Yeah. It'd been like, this is the kid. This is the kid we got.
I've been shot.
Yeah. This is the kid that's going to wind up bringing a femur to school as a cane. So.
Like a real femur?
I'm sure probably. I mean, my hometown was very, very religious too. I mean, this is the Midwest. Like for a town of 400 people, I think we had 5-6 churches, which is sort of crazy to think of that size of population having that many options.
Mm-hmm. Well, but at the same time, there'd be roughly 100 people per church, and for a population that small, I can't imagine you having very large buildings. So 100 people in a church is a decent size for that population, I guess.
My memory serves me that they were all like in mud adobes, but I'm sure they were much bigger than that. Think of everything being sort of smaller as I grew up. But yeah, it was a very, very small town, very focused on small town values and ideals. And again, that tended to also lean towards religion. And some of that religion was there was a lot of like zealots. And I guess that's a diplomatic way to put it. People who really, really love their religion.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Shoot, it's escaping me now. There's another word for that. Devout.
Yeah. Yes.
Actually, yeah. When you made the joke about the femur cane, my first thought was, in a population of 400, you've obviously got farmers and hunters around you. So, it doesn't necessarily have to be a human femur. I'm sure you probably had access to those if you wanted, not human, but,
we did
cow, deer, whatever.
Oh yeah. My biological father was a very avid hunter. And I remember like, I was probably maybe 10 at that point. And I was probably subjected to a lot more like gore and viscera in that sense when it came to like animals with hunting, because he would not only shoot, be sort of clean and dress, and we would have venison, like we would eat the things that he would kill. And there was one instance where I said, what do you do with some of these leftover parts? And he was like, oh, I don't know where you're going with this, but usually, they're discarded. And I said, how difficult is it to get like a deer brain out of the skull? I just want to put a brain in a jar.
And how difficult is it to dismember a body into several pieces? Just asking for a friend, Right.
I got a little notebook with me,
Go on.
Little members only jacket on. I wasn't a serial killer in training at all, but
no.
I think that was the first time that my father was like, okay, maybe Ash is a little bit different. Maybe we're gonna have to find things for him to do that doesn't include like
that don't involve animals.
being around animals. Yeah.
Well, let me jump down and ask some other questions. So I'm guessing that you participated in Halloween.
Oh yeah. It was hugely into Halloween, and but back then we didn't have a name for like making your own costumes. It was just like, you were just an overachiever. It wasn't like cosplay or anything. But I also had the classic plastic masks that sort of tried to disfigure you throughout the evening by pushing all of your features into like a plastic nose, and then you couldn't breathe.
Yes.
You were sweaty.
The Ben Cooper masks. That is not an uncommon topic on this show. Everyone remembers those.
Yeah. Did you have a favorite costume?
Yeah, I had a Dracula one. Like that was one of those sets that had like it was just a vinyl shirt, because if the mask wasn't uncomfortable enough, then we're going to make the rest of the clothing out of like material we make cars out of, right? So
right.
It was like this horrible like vinyl shirt that you could barely move in, but it said Dracula on it. It wasn't even really like like a
it wasn't like a suit.
No, it wasn't even like a vest with a medallion. It was like for anyone who didn't know that was Dracula, we're going to put like the Camaro sticker on your Camaro.
Yeah. My favorites are the ones that have like the shitty plastic mask, and then they also have a picture of the shitty plastic mask on the t-shirt. Like, in case you didn't know I was Chewbacca, there's also Chewbacca on my chest, because Chewbacca wears a picture of himself on his chest,
Well, I think that's because they understood how many people were taking the masks off.
Right? They're like, all right, kids are going to fucking peel this thing off in like 30 minutes. Put a picture on the shirt too.
That might have also been like the age of rampant glaucoma or something. Like, we have to represent everything multiple times to just drive it home.
Right. Least favorite costume?
Oh, least favorite. I was obsessed for a brief period of time with ninjas.
Okay.
I thought if you got the ninja costume, then you could be a ninja. Sans years of crucial training. So I got like the ninja costume, and I was horribly dismayed that, first of all, everyone could see me. I was loud and clumsy as always as a kid, and I'm like, this damn thing doesn't work at all.
Yes, so you thought it was the costume that was the thing that made the difference.
Oh, I thought for sure I'd have like shurikens, throwing stars. Like, I would become a lethal assassin at 12 with my ninja costume, and instead I just almost passed out from the sheer weight of it.
To be fair, I'm sure that the people who were trying to sell you the costume did not disabuse you of that notion.
I bought it from a ninja magazine. The magazine was actually called Ninja. So I thought I had all of this worked out. Ninja magazine, ninja costume. Yeah. It was like a hall of mirrors. Like
you had the inside source.
Yep. Every way I looked, it was ninja, ninja, ninja. And then, you get the costume, and it takes forever to put on, because it was sort of like I guess the equivalent of a real like gi, like a martial arts uniform. It had everything with it. And like you had to wrap part of it. It was almost like some weird religious ritual, where this had to fold over here because that's the ninja way. So it took super long to get it on, which I think my parents also hated, because they're like, do you just want to go as Dracula then? And I'm like, no. So yeah, probably most hated costume for every reason across the board. Like it checked every box of being horribly, horribly uncomfortable.
Okay, that's new. We haven't heard that one before. Was there ever a time when you were actually terrified of something in real life when you were a kid?
Yeah, I think that I wasn't really good around other kids. Like I just couldn't connect. I had a hard time connecting when I was a kid. And I think it was also from being in a very small rural town. I wasn't like hugely into sports after a certain time. Like when I was very young, I did, t-ball and a lot of stuff that kids did. And I'm sure I had a good time doing it. Like I have good memories of that. But I think when sports transitioned out of being fun and being hyper competitive, like when adults started to engage it more, and you saw adults sort of living vicariously through their kids, like that whole situation, I just couldn't understand. I couldn't grasp why we weren't having fun anymore. So I sort of lost a lot of connections with my peers because they were just growing up in a very different way than I did. And I think I also mentally matured a lot later. Like I was still very concerned with like toys, and I collected masks, and just the horror movie thing didn't leave. It didn't evolve, into anything different. The interest stayed there, and I think that some of my friends, especially moving into like junior high, found it juvenile. That I was still so heavily invested in all of the stuff, and they saw themselves going through changes, and they're like, why isn't this other kid changing? Like he's just the same as he was 2 years ago or 3 years ago. That's not to say that I didn't move into the area of like seeing girls and seeing them differently. Like that definitely happened. So there was that maturity, which, but also being like heavily into horror films didn't help in that area at all, not at that age. So I was just terrified of like other kids. Like I just didn't get it. Kids are sometimes venomous, man. They're cruel.
Yeah.
And if they don't understand you, oh man, you better either learn to be funny, which I tried really hard at it being for years and years.
It's a good social defense mechanism.
It is. It's a lot better than just curling into the fetal position and then, masturbating or something.
Right. It's better than the alternative. Yeah, no, I can definitely relate to that one. That's just like a visceral fear that I think everyone has, just in different varying degrees. Some people, it's not a big deal. Some people, it's a huge deal. But social acceptance of others at a young age, you just, oh my God, everyone's going to hate me if I don't fall in line and have the same interests as them.
Yeah, it's a really weird environment. And, I keep coming back to this idea of small towns. I'm not really blaming small towns per se, because I think that there's a lot of value in living in a small town. I think it's a way to grow up that sort of allows you to be a kid a little bit longer. And I think that is a great thing. But I think that also, especially, 30 years ago, it was just a completely sort of different place. And if you're a kid that doesn't really fit in, for example, you read a lot. That was sort of an escape for me when I was at school. I wasn't able to take horror movies with me, but I was able to take books and magazines. So I sort of took that interest and said, okay, I don't have a TV in front of me, but I can at least escape into this book, which talks about vampires or talks about Godzilla or whatever. And kids seeing me read, and not just read because I had to, but read because I genuinely wanted to, like that did not help my cause either.
Right.
You nerd.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And the big thing too in the Midwest is, if you're not like throwing rocks at other people or drinking really watered down beer when you're like 11, then you're gay. That was a big thing. It was always to throw the homosexual thing out. Like that was at that point in time, I think kids thought that was the biggest insult. So that happened quite a bit. If you read too much, you were definitely gay.
And well, I mean, for historical context, because Chris and I are about the same age as you are, at least in my recollection, when you're that young, you don't even really understand sexuality. And so,
right.
like throwing that insult out there, it didn't mean the same thing because
No, it was more like gay wasn't homosexual in a sexual content. It was more
it was
like
just stupid,
shunned or stupid or just not
Yeah.
accepted.
Yeah, well,
Right.
I mean, we talk
Other.
around the word retarded a lot too. I mean, thinking back
That too,
now
yeah.
of the language that we used to use back then, it's like, oh
Yeah,
my,
right? Like we
so
were just
horrible.
terrible people.
It's so bad. It's so absolutely horrible. Yeah, that it was like we had to go to
Like
those.
somebody was talking about when they would play a game. I was watching some video the other day, and they were talking about a game, and they were like, trying to beat around the bush of the title of it. It's like, it was like whoever got the ball would be tackled, and I'm just thinking, smear the queer. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
that was a game that we played as children. Yeah,
Right. Which should have told you right then that there's definitely a connection between organized sports and wanting to pile upon someone that you ultimately thought was also gay.
Right.
Yep.
It's a weird game. It's like, oh, look at that person. We absolutely hate them for everything they are. But I think we should probably go ahead and get on top of them for any amount of time that they will or will not allow us.
something wrestling team.
Right. Yeah. There was a huge need to be in a horrible, sweaty, grotesque knot with a bunch of spandex on. But yeah.
Well, different people have different needs. Yes, for some people, it means more than others. Do you feel that any of these, dreams or real life situations triggered or instilled any fears that have stuck with you through life, or was it just like temporary and then you moved on?
I think that as I got older, I reached an age where I purposefully tried to be very bold because I didn't think I had that ability as a child. I stepped back an awful lot and looked at conversations and then tried to find a way to enter that conversation. But, with my interest in the things that I was knowledgeable of, there was never really a point where I could. I just I didn't have the capacity to be involved in stuff like that. So I think as I got older, I pushed myself constantly to be a bolder person and enter conversations and sort of make those conversations about stuff that I wanted to talk about. And, and sometimes that worked and sometimes it didn't. But what it did allow me to do was it allowed me to recognize that, first of all, there was no way I was going to change. It just wasn't going to happen. Like my interest, stuff that I loved, it ran too deep. I couldn't see it not being in my life. I think I would have been miserable. So my alternative was sharing that passion and like showing people, look, this is how important this is to me. So I did that a lot. Like in college, I became a lot more verbose than when I was a kid and had, I wouldn't say a lot more good friends, but I had a ton of acquaintances due to that. People that I knew on a first name basis that I think probably genuinely, did like me, but I still found it difficult to have that deep connection where you call people like best friend. And I think by turning the tables when I got older, I ended up seeing people as, just, oh, they're just not into this. Like I looked at things a little bit differently. I think I got rid of some of that earlier resentment and feeling outcasted and ended up saying, nope, this is my playing field. If people want to come in it, that's great. And, I love the interaction, but if I don't get engaged like that, I'm fine with it because people know who I am. Like I really put myself out there. So I think having, the idea of being terrified, kids get terrified in different ways, but having a terror that was a social terror, like it just became a path. It was a journey for me. Like, how do I get away from that as much as possible and sort of build myself as a personality that people can be around regardless of our differences. I hope that doesn't sound too cliche.
No, I had a similar experience, not relating to any particular fear or love of mine, but in general, I was also not the best socially adapted kid. I moved around a lot when I was a kid, and so I didn't have a lot of that experience and skill. And then in my early to mid 20s, I got an opportunity. I had worked in restaurants on and off from I think 15, 16 years old. And then in my mid 20s, I had an opportunity where some friends worked at a country club, and they said that they needed people and they would teach me how to be a bartender.
Mm.
So I jumped at that because it's always better to be paid to do something that you want to train in, because you're doing it potentially up to 40 hours a week instead of the 4 hours on a weekend that you might be doing it on your own time.
Oh yeah.
And so I jumped at that opportunity because I knew that it was going to put me in front of people, and I was going to be forced to learn to interact with people. And it was either going to, figure it out or fail, one of the two. But, I had that challenge. I wanted to challenge myself in that area. And it sounds like you kind of did something similar, although, like you said, it was more, you involved your interests more than I did. For me, at the bartending thing, it wasn't about any particular topic. It was just the interaction itself, if that makes sense.
I think music helped me a lot too. I ended up, playing guitar. Those two, there's a lot of cross pollination, between a lot of different creative agencies. Whether it's film and music. There's a lot of people that sort of, straddle that line between the two, or however many. And I think I started to also do that as well, like playing out in public and being in bands. So I think it was a little bit of a multi-pronged approach, but no, I see exactly what you're saying too.
I'm guessing the playing in bands and that stuff came in more in the teenage years than the childhood.
Yeah. I ended up taking guitar lessons, and we would do exercises where we would play and sing at the same time. And the guy that was teaching me said, "Hey, you've actually got a pretty good voice, and there are this group of guys that are trying to form a band. They need a singer." And at the time, I was only like 15, and these guys were in their early 20s. And I had my parents drive me to their band practice, and we had an audition, and they were like, "No, we really want you in the band." And I was playing bars and stuff like when I was 16, and my sisters, like friends, were seeing me, and they're like, "Hey, this is bizarre because we know you're and you're out at this bar playing." But that helped a lot because as a kid, like there's always an age group that ultimately intimidates you. When you're in grade school, it's junior high, and junior high, it's high school, and then high school, it's college. There's always a group that you're just not for sure if you're going to fit in or not. And I think playing out from people who are in their 20s and then having conversations with them afterwards, where I didn't always divulge how old I was, mind you. Like that was the first thing that I said, where they're like, "Hey man, great set." And I'm like, "I'm 16.
Cool.
I played this right, exactly. Oh, good for you. Keep rocking. Ultimately, but yeah, that sort of helped too. Because at that point I was like, no, I think I'm going to be okay for the long haul.
Mm-hmm. You'll get through it.
Yeah, at least as good as we could. Then, but you're always miserable in some context or another. It's the human condition.
True. Yes, I think that's a Midwest thing.
We do love our misery.
Can never let yourself get too happy.
No, because the crop will always fail one year.
Yeah.
This is true.
Going back to childhood for a minute. So was there ever a time in your childhood when you felt completely calm or safe or happy, like blissful?
Either getting into that point of because I used to just, man, I would consume any book that I was given. There were just those moments where you get into sort of that weird hypnosis where like time and space just suddenly are no longer there. You're not tethered by anything. And I don't know if I've ever been able to get back there the way I was able to do that, as a kid. I think as you get older, you still have this, strange lifeline of problems and worries and stuff you have to do tomorrow and stuff that didn't get done today that is so persistent and so invasive that you can only sort of get to that point, but you're never completely there. But I think as a kid, reading anything from, Stephen King to, Orson Scott Card, and then I would try to get a hold of like Twilight Zone teleplays, and I remember reading a lot of Richard Matheson. Anything of Matheson I could get a hold of, and there were just times where I was completely taken away. I was in that world. I was in that universe, and like that to me, that ultimate escapism. Wow, I wish I could get back to that. That was just crazy the way I was able to do that when I was a kid.
Let's jump back and also talk about family here for a minute, because we didn't touch on that too much. You mentioned that your mom was a horror fan, and your sister, it wasn't clear whether or not she was a horror fan, but at least liked messing with you.
She was a
Oh,
terrorizing
love
brother fan.
Yes, huge fan.
Let's. You're going to say something?
Well, she was very popular in junior high and high school. She had a ton of friends, and she was any kind of like, extracurricular thing that was going on, any social organization in school she was a part of. So she was a cheerleader. She was, on all these committees. So very different from me. I'm walking down the hall and I've got, hair in my face, and I've got a little like Iron Maiden Power Slave shirt on and ripped up jeans and Converse, and and my sister's like, there's my brother. That was sort of that dynamic. Like she just didn't understand me like at all, and I guess I was just this weird little kid that happened to live in the same house as her. And I think my father sort of had the same feelings as that, sadly.
So let's jump into the teenage years. You mentioned playing in this band, but what other? Well, let me ask a different question. So for some of our guests, horror is a mainstay that stays with them throughout their entire lives. Other guests, it's been this thing where it was big in their childhood. They kind of moved away from it in their teens, and they came back to it as an adult. Was this something that stuck with you, or do you feel like you moved away and came back to it?
I think it was always there. It was always this persistent hobby and pastime. And I think when you get to be a teenager, specifically when you get your license, and here in Illinois, you're 16. So once you turned 16 here, it just felt like your entire life opened up. I wasn't chained to this geography of a town of X amount of people. I could now drive. I could drive myself to my band practice. Whenever a new movie would hit, it wasn't about asking my parents. It was about just going to it.
Now you have that level of freedom.
It was huge. I think I actually learned to embrace things even more in my teenage years because I wasn't dependent on anyone else to say, okay, Tuesdays when we do this, Thursdays when we do this. And then you sort of bide your time in between these days. As soon as I turned 16, it was like, I'm going to go to the comic book store today. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Even not having a lot of money, it was this ability to go places and immerse yourself on a more regular basis than you did when you were a kid. So I was going to see a lot of movies, even if it was by myself. If it was something where Friday night I couldn't, get a buddy to go, I'm still going. I had that ability now. So I think, those interests even more so sort of cemented themselves because I was also meeting people. I was meeting people who had similar interests because I was able to go to bigger centers of commerce, bigger stores, clubs more regularly because I had a license.
Right. Do you remember any particular media that stood out to you in your teens?
I think I attached myself. I was big, probably more into gore back then because it was like we would try to find the craziest stuff. A lot of like, video nasties from the 80s. So you would rent Faces of Death. You would try to find, Cannibal Ferox. You would try to find all this stuff.
Ooh, straight to Cannibal Ferox, not even Cannibal Holocaust. Okay.
I'm digging deep.
Connoisseur.
We felt, I think, very much like adults because a lot of kids were still very part of this system of school athletics, and they're very much part of the school system. And I feel like myself and my group of friends were a little more removed from it. The stuff that we were doing based purely on outside interests that didn't reflect what we were doing day to day in school.
Right. This group of friends that you found, were they in your local area or were they at this other larger metropolitan area?
A little bit of both. There were a couple of guys that I grew up with that I think because I was always around this stuff, they sort of got inundated with it. And I think that they became secondhand fans and grew an appreciation for this stuff. And I think they also sort of liked this idea that, what other people were getting together for study groups, we were literally getting together and watching the video dad and stuff on Friday nights, and ordering pizzas, and sometimes like doing the tabletop gaming stuff. So I think that they saw it as an escape from high school too, where they weren't constantly having to focus on where they were at and what they were doing.
Yeah, I can see that. Studying is not something that you want to do on a Friday night, that's for sure. And you may also not want to hang out with some of the other people that aren't into some of the same things that you are,
Yeah.
Not necessarily social outcasts, but like you're saying, like the competition thing kind of turned you off. There are certain things that other people get into that you're just like, I'm not into that.
Yeah, and it always seemed like it was like interest or hobbies through necessity. You were in this because it was a part of the bigger program and involving school and then eventually college. And it was like, now I think I can juggle doing the school thing. And luckily, I never really had a problem with grades. So that was something that kept me very heavily involved in my interest because there was no real pushback. It wasn't a thing where, my parents are coming to me and going, your grades are failing. My grades were always, fairly good, so there wasn't a lot that they could come at me with that was like, what you're doing is not working. Like, no, I'm juggling and I'm doing okay.
Right. It's like, there's alcoholism and then there's the term of being a functional alcoholic.
Right.
You were a functional horror fan.
I was able to get up. Some people didn't even know it. I took lunch at the same time. Yeah, definitely a functional horror.
I like the way there's some people didn't even know it. Again, like functional alcoholic. We didn't even know.
No clue. We passed out in gym class a couple of times, but we just thought it was exhaustion.
Yeah. Let's see. So, gore, extreme, pushing boundaries, going on a quest. Also, the going on a quest thing is typical for teenage years. It's just this is the direction you chose to go in. Was there anything other than the gore or the extremities that stood out to you in this media that you mentioned? You mentioned Faces of Death, Cannibal Ferox, Dead Alive.
I started to look at the way movies were made. Again, like I went through a period when I was younger where watching something like the Sinbad movies and the Ray Harryhausen stuff, I was looking at stop motion. I was fascinated by all these little models and maquettes and how it worked with live action stuff when I was a child. And then there was a period where I was very much a teenager and was looking for the gross stuff and wasn't really thinking about how it was done. It was just this visual experience, And then I think I started to get back into this idea of filmmaking where I would start to seek out a certain director. Like if I saw one film that I really enjoyed and there was some kind of visual flair or pacing or something that I found that was exemplary, I would then try to seek out every movie from that same director. So I started to get back into the idea of what was it about this that sort of got me excited about it. And then because I was doing that, I would end up watching a lot of movies that were non-horror related because I was just watching a director's films. And I think that helped me get more of an appreciation for film in general because I had never been interested in dramas or anything like that until I started to really focus on sort of the director's vision. And then I was watching a lot of stuff that fell outside of the genre.
And then it ruined films for you forever because you notice these things every single time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, and then there's that period where you have to take a step back and go, okay, how do I get back into watching movies? Like not reviewing movies or dissecting movies.
Turning the brain off.
Yeah. Luckily, that's come easy for me now. Like the older I get, the easier it is for me to put on a movie and enjoy it. There was a period where it was very difficult, but now I'm more of a movie lover, back to where I used to be when I was younger.
The networking thing that you mentioned is also very common. What I mean by networking is like seeking out other directors' work and building this sort of profile of connections mentally. For me, I did that with music when I was in my teenage years or early teens was when hip hop came out. And early hip hop, one of the coolest things about it to me was all the different samples that would be used from sometimes vocal samples, sometimes it was musical samples, and hearing something and going, oh, that was used in this other song by this other artist, and they did this other song that referenced that other song, and building those kind of connections. And I know Chris, for example, was into music, and he would go into he's into what label. What artists were associated with this label and what other music were they doing, and
Yeah.
I actually think it's also the same thing. We often joke about women being interested in who's dating who and all the gossip involved with that. And I think that that's a feminine, socially acceptable expression of the same thing. Just like for guys, being into sports and being aware of what player is on what team, who get traded to who, and what their stats are.
Yeah.
Like these are all examples of the same sort of dynamic, if you will.
Yeah, I think as you get older, you crack that code a little bit too. Like when I talk about being younger and not understanding why people did certain things, the competitiveness of sports, etc. But as I started to get older, and I think that my group of friends expanded to the point where there was a lot of people that I enjoyed having around who didn't have similar interests, but we had a similar sense of humor, or they were good people, and it was just a joy to be around them. Where suddenly I was like, okay, my want to collect movie props or posters is very, very similar to trading cards for sports. My ability to rattle off horror trivia is very similar to, like you were saying, stats for a particular player. Like I got it more so than I think I ever did, and was like, okay, no, this is really the same thing.
Right.
It's just a different angle.
Right. And it also ties in with some of the things that you've said already in terms of like bonding with your mom, and I forget what the other words that you said, but basically connecting socially with different groups. It's just this was the avenue that you chose to do that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but it afforded me the ability as I got older, I think, to gain friends a little bit easier, to be in social situations a little bit easier. Like I'm fairly comfortable at my age, where I'm sure there are still a lot of people that aren't. So I'm very grateful for that.
Right. Anytime you were terrified of anything in real life as a teen?
As I got older, I met adults who clearly were not good people. And being from a small town and having very, very small circles of friends and acquaintances, I hadn't met a lot of people who clearly had deep psychological issues, and psychological issues that made them want to inflict pain on people. Like I wasn't around that much. And as I got older, especially like as a teen, meeting people where truly just you knew that they were predators, in one sense or another. You could just feel it. There was this sense of I got to get out of here. But I think some of those first interactions were terrifying, because simulated in a movie, especially in horror films, it's exciting. In real life, it's very much not.
Yeah, because you're not disconnected from that layer of this is the movie, this is real life. You are there, it's real life, and it's like, all right, this is I don't like this.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Very understandable. Again, same follow-up question. Did these things, either the dreams or the real experiences, trigger any fears that have been lasting for you, or has it affected you in a lasting way, or is it just something that was for that time only?
I think it was sort of for that time only. I went through periods where I was creative, but in a different way than I am now, where I went through periods where I was doing a lot of music and writing a lot of music, and that was a completely different narrative. Like that was getting out expressions of, as a musician, as expressions of, frustration for your current situation, sort of the blue collar blues, frustration over relationships not going the way you want them to. Like it was almost strictly this outpouring of emotion, and I wasn't really writing music as a storytelling, narrative. It was just sort of like translating emotion. And when I got out of that, and I wasn't really writing a lot of music anymore, and I was getting back into just writing and just writing as a hobby, I started to take a lot of those things that I thought were scary and and try to translate them into a narrative, something that made more sense than just an isolated situation. And I think that was extremely, extremely cathartic. I learned a lot about my responses to things, why I reacted the way I did to certain things, and how it was either justified or not, and how I could have went about it differently. So when you take a narrative, when you're trying to tell a story and you're sort of doing this juxtaposition, looking at the idea from so many different angles where it could go or couldn't go, depending on how it's going to reflect the story, you sort of ask yourself those same questions as you ask yourself, how would a character do this? You're asking yourself, how would you do this?
Would it be realistic?
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of reflection there. And I think it's a lot of self-therapy. So I think I translated a lot of that fear into story when I got older.
Artistic expression is definitely a great way of processing stressful events. I've done that myself. I'm sure we're not alone.
Yep.
It is. It's a great medium.
Well, any medium. I mean, like whether it's painting or music or writing, any expression of like I say, getting it out of you. Sort of. It's strange how cathartic that can be. There are some people who like to work out their issues, physically, either exercising or sports or what have you. But sitting down and writing it out, or spelling it out in other mediums can be helpful as well.
And the hourly rate's a lot cheaper.
Yes,
this is true.
Compared to therapy. Yes, yeah. And if you're lucky, you can get paid to do it.
That too, yes.
Yeah. Let's jump into some of the adult years. So now as an adult, what would you say are some of the big media that have impacted you in your adult life?
That's an interesting question. I don't know how easy that question really it is for me, because I'm to that point where I'm making a lot more stuff than I probably ever did. Like I'm creating a lot more stuff, and I'm working through the idea of creative process differently than when I was younger. So I think the stuff now that really sort of impacts me works on so many different levels. I love the ability to watch something and turn my brain off and love it for what it is. And I'm very thankful that I can do that now. And then again, I love something that to me is extremely provocative. Just for instance, I really, really enjoyed Midnight Mass, the limited series on Netflix.
Was Midnight Mass the one with the angel, or the oops, sorry, spoilers.
The entity? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, the winged entity, which may or may not have been an angel.
Yeah, and that's that's a Mike Flanagan series, and I tend to like a lot of what that guy does. And I think one of the reasons I do enjoy his work so much is because especially in Midnight Mass, there were periods of prolonged conversation with characters, which, I mean, let's face it, we don't really get that in feature film that much. If we do, it's usually a drama. We don't get it in genre filmmaking that much, but because we're in an age now where we've got a million series that are upwards of 11, 12 hours long, we're afforded more of that character interaction. And there were some episodes of that where, aside from the ongoing story that they were telling, it was just sort of a beautiful reflection on people getting together and exploring their own mortality, their own humanity. Like, I was really impressed by my emotional response to a genre series like that was able to take a moment and say, this is going to be a very character-centric episode. We can push that story further later, but right now we're going to give you a real understanding of who these characters are. And I think that sort of changed what I was looking for with a lot of genre stuff. I'm like, wow, that's an element that I really appreciate that we don't get to see that much.
Anything other than Midnight Mass come to mind?
Well, I do like a lot of the like a Haunting of Bly Manor and Hill House, the Mike Flanagan stuff.
He did a great job with Dr. Sleep.
Oh yeah, and I love Dr. Sleep too. Like I just think that the guy has a really, really good knack for giving us characters that we can relate to and having that really impact our overall reflections on the movie itself. I've seen stuff that I really, really like over the last few years. Stuff again that, like I said earlier, sort of revitalizes my interest in the genre. There was an Irish film, I think it was called A Simple Song. That was
Oh wait, was it a dark song? The one about summoning?
oh yes, a
an
dark
angel?
song.
So good.
That
A lot
I
of people didn't like that in the end because the payoff was just like, oh, it's just, again, sorry everyone, spoilers, but oh, it's just a giant guy. But no, that's historically accurate for what angels were described as.
And
And
I
just
mean,
good.
no, continue. I mean, it was great. I thought it gave me everything that I wanted out of that movie.
Yeah, it was the tension between the woman who came to the man and him, and just how everything wasn't spelled out, and how it was implied that it was very serious, but you still don't know what's going on. It kept me intrigued.
And I think typically when we look at something like ritualistic magic, I mean, there's so many religious texts that talk about just how intense some of these rituals are, and rituals that have nothing to do with magic, but are just religious in nature.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we've seen a movie that really depicted it that way. I mean, we're used to like the Doctor Strange approach, where you just throw a bunch of gang signs and then a building explodes.
Like some Naruto fucking hand signals. Yeah, right. No, but you're right. They went much more in depth with it. It was preparing. It was fasting. It was fasting sexually, emotionally, and energy. It was, yeah. They went into a lot more depth with that.
Yeah, that really fascinated me.
Yeah. So, as an adult, participate in Halloween?
Now, from a sort of different standpoint, because I have kids, so it's that sort of living vicariously through them, where I love their enthusiasm that's still there. I still dress up with them, like I still enjoy doing that, but I guess it's also more for them than for myself at this point.
Anything you've actually been terrified in real life as an adult?
I think the world right now sort of terrifies me.
Right? That's also not an uncommon answer. Yeah.
I think this idea of like it seems like we're on the precipice to just running around in like old dusty Dodge Daytonas shooting each other for gas. It's just weird.
Mad Max.
Yeah, it's very like pre-apocalyptic. It just feels like we're dangling and we don't really know what side we're going to land on. Is it going to be that we're going to get better, or is that it's just going to get infinitely worse? And sometimes I feel like maybe socially we don't have the capacity to get better again, and that scares me. That we're too far.
Agreed.
We're too far gone,
and that there are some people who are looking forward to it.
Yeah, the idea that there are people out there that are rubbing their hands like Mr. Burns, that this is making money, and this is all part of a bigger.
Oh, not even about making the money, of just like looking forward to the excitement, like bring it on. Like you don't understand. Like
something rhymes with you, halloo.
Yeah, it's scary in that sense too, that there are people that think that's when they're going to have power. It's strange.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Or not even that. Like, I think there are people who understand that there's a very good chance that they're personally going to die, but the people that they want to be in control will get to be in control. Like they're giving something up for their society.
Yeah. It's just very strange. It's a time where I shake my head a lot, and I wish that things would get better for the future generation, because they deserve it. They sort of deserve us to not keep fucking things up all the time, and give them a world where they've got opportunity to make it even better, because we're open to it. But I just, I do a lot of well wishing, because it seems like that's all I'm capable of doing now.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have a lot to say about that, because that's a whole conversation.
Yeah, it's a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
Let's jump to some of the wrap up questions here. There's still probably about maybe 10 questions, but these cover more of your life overall and don't necessarily relate to horror. The first two questions I'm going to ask, I'm going to give them to you at the same time because it could be the same answer for both, or it could be different answers. But if we were to ask, what is your favorite movie, and then what movie have you watched more times than any other?
A movie that I could watch ad nauseum is, and this is sort of a weird one, but I absolutely love Fritz Lang's Metropolis. I just
okay.
Every time I think I watch that, I find something new in it, or I'm perpetually fascinated by what they did when they did it. Like that movie just captures my imagination. I think it's at its heart a movie that transcends time. It always has like a social value to it, and it just feels huge for a movie, that was made when we were still using color templates and on-screen dialogue. Like it still feels enormous to me. It feels huge and towering, and I love that feeling when I watch it.
So is that one the one that you would say is your favorite, or the one that you've watched more times than any other?
I would say it's probably my favorite, but like I watch bad movies over and over again. Movies that, like, by all rights, I'm like, why have I watched Hudson Hawk like a million times? Why do I keep that on?
And now I'm going to have Swing on a Star stuck in my head again. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you.
Yeah, try to get that Danny Aiello classic out of your noggin. And then I would say, like, rewatchable. I can watch Jaws from beginning to end ad nauseum and never get tired of it. Like, it's that one film, if it's on TV.
Let me put this a different way. Instead of saying which one could you watch more times than any other, I'm saying which one do you think you have you watched more times than any other?
Oh, geez, Evil Dead 2.
Nice. Okay. That was an easy answer.
It's just like a happy place movie. Like it's so goofy, and yet it's got all those horror elements that, especially when I was younger, that I just dug. It went so many like really brave places for a low budget movie that I like. Every time I put Evil Dead 2 on, I'm still enjoying it.
Yeah.
What do you mean by brave?
I think they did a lot of stuff that they didn't need to, or maybe shouldn't have, with their budget. I mean, we've got some interesting stop motion animation there that could have easily been done easier. It's like they chose to do it because they had a vision for it. They go, this is the way it's supposed to look. So they did that instead of, like, if I were to do that film, I wouldn't obviously be able to do it any better, but I would make decisions that hid the limitations more than they did. So I think the fact that they went for everything with like extreme gusto, to me, is always impressive. It's always impressive that they were like, no, like they've got clouds that, dissolve in his eyes and we see it. It's like, wow, they just, everything they thought of, they sort of just did like that. Yeah. I admire that.
Do you see any common threads about what kind of horror you like? Cannibalism, occult, metaphysical?
It's weird because I sort of hit extremes where I like movies that have a lot of forward thrust and momentum. And then I like a lot of like slow burn sort of films. I used to be really fond of like creature features because I used to love to see the practical effects that was involved. And I can look back and go, wow, I love the transformation scene, of course, of American Werewolf in London. But I also love, the bladder work done in The Howling. Like, I love that transformation scene. I still find the transformation scene actually in The Howling scarier than American Werewolf, because there's the point where this poor woman is watching the entire transformation happen in front of her, and it's like, as a character, she's sitting there realizing she's going to die, and she's like mutually disgusted and fascinated by what's in front of her. But it's like a captive audience kind of thing. That scene always affected me, where it's like, yeah, you're just sitting there waiting for the moment he's more animal than man, and then that's when it's going to kill you. But to watch it, to have to sort of sit there and watch it take place, it would just be excruciating.
It's interesting that there's this dichotomy between, as you put it, the extreme forward thrust, but also slow burns. I mean, those are both extremes in different ways. but they are very different in terms of what, the actual content being, very fast or very slow.
Extremes, not the boring middle ground.
And I think that, it's interesting you'd say boring middle ground, because I think that to me is like the worst defense of a movie is if I just don't think about it at all. Like in that context, I think I'd rather watch a movie like Saint Maud that I become very opinionated about than watch a movie where the following day it's just gone. Even though I like the idea of disposable media, you can watch it and it serves its purpose for an hour and a half and then you move on. But to me, that's sort of pornography. It's like I've got this very, very selected, thing that I need to do, and I'm going to watch it and then sort of move on from it. But the stuff that sticks with you, again, even if it sticks with you in a negative light, sort of makes more sense for me to watch it, I guess.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think that's like a creator's worst nightmare is your work being unforgettable. Whether it's liked or disliked, if it's just not regarded, that's probably the worst case scenario as a creator.
Yeah, I would hate to make something and have somebody ask about it, and you tell them the entire story up to the ending, and then they go, "Oh yeah, I saw that." And you're like, "Oh shit!" Like I spent the entire running time of my movie talking about my movie, and then they finally remembered they saw it. Oh no. That's a bit of a nightmare.
There you go. There's a waking nightmare.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're doing
or rather that they say that and then the conversation stops there. Like the fact that they don't want to continue discussing it, that's the problem.
Right. Or then they just look around airily for someone that they might know.
Yeah, look at their watch.
What other conversation can I get into? And they just try to find something else going on around them.
Okay, so before I ask the last couple questions, just a sort of summary of the things that I've been hearing in the call coming up multiple times are, bonding, networking, emotional, social connections. Those seem to be really important to you. There was something else that I heard. Power, loss of control. The thing that you mentioned with the dreams of, the parental fears about your kid, also is kind of similar in the loss of power sense of the nuclear fallout dreams, being utter loss of control there. So that's sort of like a secondary thing that I've heard. So I would guess, do you have any idea why those things are important to you? And again, primarily, it sounds like the social bonding part of it is what seemed most important to you. And if you think that that's a not a good assessment and that there's something else about horror that speaks to you more, correct me.
No, I think that you definitely struck a chord there, and I think one that's pretty consistent in the way I've attached myself to the genre, and I think a lot of it is like my own personal journey of being in places where I felt completely powerless, like I had no control, and then working through so much of my life to gain enough where I felt comfort. And I think to have that immediately taken away probably is very scary for me, to think that I worked so hard to become a person that I could live with and that I could, put out there and have others see and be comfortable with my image. And then to have that sort of not matter at all, to have that be just something that's not a factor, and realize that, okay, this mattered, and it mattered in this context, but in so many situations it doesn't. That's probably why initially when I met people that I immediately knew it doesn't matter what I say, it doesn't matter what I do. Like this person has troubles and issues, and they just want to hurt. They just want to hurt. They just want to maim. They just want to kill. Like when you're faced with that, all of who you are, it boils down to something much more primal that you have no control over.
Yeah. Let me try to rephrase it in my own words to see if I'm following you. So it's like you're saying, okay, I've spent all this time struggling, working, and find a place for myself within these rules, and now I'm meeting somebody who doesn't follow these rules.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is that a good way of?
No, I think that's a perfect like summation. I think, and that's something that I think a lot of people are terrified of. It's that terror of, I've studied 4 hours for my history quiz, and the quiz was in math.
Mm.
It's that, wow, I've worked so hard on being comfortable in my element, and now I'm thrust into something that I don't have a basic framework for. Like, that to me is scary.
All right, so we were talking about struggling to align with social rules and then meeting people who don't care about the rules. And then one of the last questions here that we like to ask is, okay, so now that we've narrowed in on that, why horror? Is there something about horror that keeps bringing you back to this genre?
Yeah, I think a lot of people use the comparison to, like a thrill ride, a roller coaster, amusement park kind of thing. And I think that it's used so often because it really is, in its simplicity, a pretty good answer, is that you're putting yourself through these extremes with a fairly high degree of safety. You can ride a roller coaster 5 times and reality begs that the 5th time you're taking your chances, but more than likely all 5 times it's going to go off without a hitch. But the idea of being, in a cart that is sort of, a runaway cart at breakneck speed, you have no control of it. All you have to do is surrender yourself to this reckless abandon of riding the ride from beginning to end is pretty terrifying. It's that complete lack of control. And I think, again, to go back to this idea of having a world that you've had a lot of participation in, in either building yourself or, building elements around it, and then being thrust into a situation you have absolutely no power over, the rules have completely changed. Horror does that a lot. The family that's on vacation, the couple that's on a date. These are fairly mundane situations where all of a sudden the rules change completely. Mm-hmm. I think there is a bit of a thrill being able to experience that vicariously through our characters, but realizing that we're doing it with a very high degree of safety.
I like something that you said earlier. Basically, giving up control to someone who will scare me but keep me safe. We had talked earlier about, how the primary thing was the social, bonding element, and then the secondary thing was, loss of power and control. And so it's interesting that we're coming back to this, like I say, this concept of giving up control willingly to someone who's going to scare you but keep you safe. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think that we do that on a lot of different levels in very common relationship scenarios. We're doing that our entire life when we gain a new friendship. We're allowing a person to know more about ourselves, which is frightening, but we're doing it again if what we think is a decent, degree of safety. And especially when we get into relationships where things like love or intimacy is concerned, it's that same, we're really
consent.
Not comfortable. Yeah. With what's happening, but we're giving consent because, ultimately there's something here that we're craving.
Consent itself could be its own topic.
Yes.
Is there some reason why that's important to you?
Yeah, most certainly. But I think that, for me, it's strange in a sense. I grew up and most of my relationships were with females. I had a very strong relationship with my mother, but practically none with my father. I had a sister, but at that time, no brothers. I had a lot of male peers who I was friends with, but when it came to, in-depth one-on-one conversation, I almost always chose a female for that. And, then you get into an industry where a lot of females are getting hacked up by guys in hockey masks. They're also hacking up males, as well. But I think there's this whole idea of there's a lot that just doesn't fit in socially with horror films. That's part of what it is saying, hey, we're breaking all of our rules here. You can come and experience all this rule breaking with us. But when you leave the theater, you get to be the same person.
Craziness with consent.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's a great way to put it.
Good name for
could be I was just going to say, that's a good tagline.
I was going to say that's a good title for a book.
I like that too. Yeah.
Well, really, last question: is there anything that you could think of or that you have thought of during this call that might be relevant that hasn't come up?
I think when I have conversations about horror, the thing that I walk away with is that I end up talking a lot more about the psychology of it sometimes than I end up talking about, like, I love the practical effects. I love the BTS stuff where we get to see how, the where all the transformation was done, when we see all these, sort of vignettes with Rick Baker and all those guys from the 80s. Like, I really do love the rock star mentality that effects artists had, like, in the 80s and 90s. And I think I missed that quite a bit because it just showed this fantastic enthusiasm. And I think that's something that I don't talk about a lot. So as I'm talking about the stuff that sort of hits me on an emotional level, I also want to say, wow, I sort of miss the 80s, and I sort of miss this rock star mentality that we had. And we looked at these effects guys and these directors, and it was, I think, very different than it is now.
Yeah.
That is true. But the other thing that I was thinking while you're talking about this, I was still focusing on that phrase of craziness with consent, and realized that there's sort of a connection there with what you said when you were a kid and watching these movies with your mom of, the consent of being able to be allowed to stay up late for these movies. There's some relation there too of that kind of could be described as craziness with consent too.
Yeah, I think so, definitely. I think probably compared to other parents, they would say that there was a fair amount of craziness in there, at my age, and, allowing me to see certain things that I don't think a lot of kids were allowed to at that age. So no, I think that that's definitely applicable. Yeah.
Yes, and also having the mentality to, like, maybe you didn't understand the consent at that age, but it was happening whether you could describe it vocabulary with your vocabulary or not. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I was seeing it as an opportunity to spend more time with an adult in their setting, late at night, watching something I wouldn't regularly get to watch. So it was sort of being able to tread this territory that I wasn't allowed access to that much. And there was excitement in that, it again, it felt like I was being allowed to be older in that moment. I was taken a little more seriously, even though I was a kid. I felt
crossing a boundary.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a little bit of that forbidden fruit, but again, with that high degree of safety. And I'm with my mom, she allegedly knows what's good for me and what
allegedly.
Yes.
Some suspicions arose, but for the most part, yeah, that was it. Like, hey, I can enjoy this. It's maybe not something that every parent would allow, but this is my parent that cares for me and won't let anything bad happen.
Right. Cool. Well, I'm sure Chris has as well, but at least speaking for myself, I very much enjoyed this call.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Me too. Thank you so much. I've had a great time.
Before I hit the closing, do you want to again pitch what you're currently working on?
Yeah. So, depending where we're at in the timeline, November 1st, this is my first full-length feature film that I wrote and directed. I've produced a couple of feature films in the past, horror comedy called Camp Death 3 in 2D that if you do seek out, I'll both commend and apologize for at the same time. I've done some short films, but this was my first attempt at a full-length feature film, and we've been very blessed at this point with the film. We've been an official selection now at more than 30 festivals worldwide.
Nice.
Won 23 awards that include best feature, best horror film, best director, best editing. We've been very fortunate in that.
Cool.
Yeah, we've been to a lot of places. We've been able to show a lot of people the film, and we've had some fantastic feedback on it. I think on IMDb right now we're at a 9.1. We've got some really, really positive reviews. And November 1st, it comes out exclusively Amazon and Vudu until its TVOD release on December 6th, which includes Dish Network, the Comcast network, so a lot of those set-top box cable boxes, as well as Apple TV and a bunch of other VOD services. And then I think in February we'll probably be on most streaming channels, then streaming wide.
Okay. Well, if listeners want more information about that, we will be putting together a bio page for you, and we can link to anything that you'd like to. And I'm sure they can also visit the Horror Fix website directly, which we can link to from our bio page as well.
No, certainly. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And thank you to anybody out there listening. Again, please do come visit us at horrormakesushappy.com. We've got a list of people there that we'd like to talk to. If you can get us in touch with any of those people, let us know. If you would like us to add somebody to the list, let us know. We are still in growth mode, so as we've said before, just tell a friend. If you like what we're doing, let somebody know. Thanks.